Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Tonight we'll talk to the mayor of a city on the verge of bankruptcy who insists on maintaining sanctuary city status. We'll also talk to the leader of a transgender rights group who is furious about President Trump's recent action on bathrooms. But first up, it is undoubtedly a new age of nationalism. Politicians who reject rootless globalism are thriving all over the globe, and nowhere was that more obvious than at CPAC these last 3 days. Watch.
Global cooperation, dealing with other countries, getting along with other countries is good. It's very important. But there is no such thing as a global anthem, a global currency, or a global flag. This is the United States of America that I'm representing. I'm not representing the globe. I'm representing your country.
It's not only not going to get better, it's going to get worse every day in the media. And here's why. But by the way, the internal logic makes sense. They're corporatist, globalist media that are adamantly opposed to an economic nationalist agenda like Donald Trump has.
I always believed that we should govern our own country. I always believed we should be free to reach out and make our own deals with our real friends in the world. And it's funny, our real friends in the world speak English, have common law, and stand by us in times of crisis.
You may recognize that man. That was Nigel Farage, who knows quite a bit about running a successful nationalist movement. He once headed the UK Independence Party and was a top backer of the 2016 Brexit referendum that demanded Britain's withdrawal from the European Union. Nigel Farage joins us now. Nigel, thanks for coming on. So,
thank you.
I think it's fair to say it's official. Nationalism is now global. It's obvious. There's no denying it with the president's speech. Why?
Well, you say nationalism. I actually call it nationism.
Okay.
We believe in the nation state. That is the unit we identify with. That is what we feel part of. That is what we cheer for in the Olympics. And if necessary, that is what we're prepared to fight for. It embodies our values, our families, our communities, our heritage, our identity, maybe even our tribe. And I think what happened in 2016 with Brexit and with Trump, and I believe is going to roll out through 2017, is a return to normality. What the globalists tried to do was to destroy the nation state. And what those two big events of 16 did was to re-establish the democratic nation state. And that is right and proper and normal.
So the nation state is such an obvious arrangement. It was organic. People created them because they wanted them. I guess the obvious question is, why did so many people in power spend so much time trying to obliterate them? What was their motive? Well,
one of the motives was that France and Germany, every 25 years, kept fighting each other.
Exactly.
So they kind of wondered, how do we stop the Germans from crossing the Rhine and trying to smash the French? And they thought if they merged the two countries, that might be a way to do it. But just as with communism, the big idea that came before this, the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. The mistake they made was this: provided nation states are democratic, they will not fight and they will not go to war with each other. And if you try and give people a false identity, a false flag, a false god, if you like, then they will rebel and turn against it. And I think that what the European Union was kind of a prototype for a bigger form of global government. And had Hillary Clinton won, you would have become part of it. So thank goodness that Trump has stopped the rot.
Right, and there would have been an even bigger reaction against it, I predict, in 4 years. So I think American nationalism is a good thing, a benign thing. I think the same of British nationalism. I think most people would agree deep down. Should we be as excited about the prospect of, I don't know, German nationalism or Japanese nationalism? Are all nationalisms created equal, and should we like them all?
Well, that depends. If those nationalist movements get to a position where they're able to obliterate the democratic process, then we have a problem. But all the while we have genuine democratic government, then what we should do is to trust the people. The people in all these countries are not stupid, and they will not allow real extremists into power. And the one thing that I find, Tucker, just so offensive is for people like me and Trump who've been pushing this idea of the nation state. You know, you make your own laws, you control your own borders, and you reach out to your friends. We've been called extremists, we've been called fascists, we've been called all the names under the sun, and actually the real fascists are those that shout us down and say that our view isn't valid.
So you heard a species of that from Steve Bannon at CPAC yesterday, who said this is going to be really hard to affect what we want to do because the globalists will be against us. Do you agree with him that the opposition to Trump is rooted in this attachment to globalism, a global government?
Well, what the globalists did, the supranationalists did, is they managed to get big business and the big banks on their side.
Right.
They created a marketplace where the big guys could carve everything up at the expense of the small. So, you know, we've got to recognise that there are some very big vested interests that do not want Brexit to be a success and don't want Trump to be a success. You know, this is not going to be a cakewalk. This is not going to be easy, and I think that's what Steve Bannon was alluding to yesterday. But I'll tell you what the good news is. The good news is that since Brexit, there's now a far bigger majority of the British people that support us getting back control of our lives.
Right.
And the same thing is happening here in America. Since November the 8th, what you've seen is a man who was elected on a ticket, and he intends to put it into action. That is what democracy is supposed to be. I think Trump is bringing back confidence and faith in the democratic process, and I bet you his popularity ratings are going to soar from here.
So last question, do you think the people around him buy in? I mean, you see people like Steve Mnuchin, other Goldman people. Have they changed their views completely? Are they on board with this?
Well, the fact that somebody worked at Goldman doesn't necessarily make them a bad person.
No, of course not.
It probably means they're very knowledgeable and very bright, and they understand financial markets. Look, I look at that team around Trump. I look at Bannon. I look at Kellyanne Conway. I think we've got some very smart people now in charge of the USA. And I've got every confidence that Donald Trump's team are going to bring jobs back to America.
Yeah.
They're going to control illegal immigration. And I think a couple of years into this administration, this could be one of the most popular presidents of modern times.
Nigel Farage, on an optimistic note, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.
Well, if you've been awake at all, you probably know that President Trump does not care for the media. Today at CPAC, he had this to say about the nation's publishers and pundits. Watch.
I want you all to know that we are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake. A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are. They are the enemy of the people. They're very dishonest people. In fact, in covering my comments, the dishonest media did not explain that I called the fake news the enemy of the people, the fake news. They dropped off the word fake. And all of a sudden, the story became the media is the enemy. They take the word fake out. And now I'm saying, oh, no, this is no good. But that's the way they are. So I'm not against the media. I'm not against the press. I don't mind bad stories if I deserve them. And I tell you, I love good stories, but we won't talk. I don't get too many of them.
We're joined now by Howie Kurtz, host of Media Buzz right here on Fox. So, Howie, I think a lot of presidents have felt this way. I don't think anyone has ever said it out loud. What's the effect of saying that out loud?
Well, when the president went after fake news, first of all, he actually identified CNN, CBS, ABC,
Yes.
NBC, the New York Times. What became clear today with this escalation, Tucker, is that neutralizing the press is the central mission now, a central mission of President Trump and his White House. This is not just counterpunching. This is not just letting off steam. He is convinced that the media are so hostile toward him and that many journalists so despise him that the only way he can get his agenda passed is to discredit the fake news part of the media.
So part of what happens is if the president calls, say, CNN or the Washington Post the opposition party, it takes away any incentive they have, assuming they ever had one, to be fair to him.
Well, there are two sides to this equation because while a lot of people are portraying this as President Trump's war on the media, look, this guy has been subjected to the most negative, relentlessly negative coverage that we have seen in the general election, in the transition, and now in his first month as president. So he has reason to be ticked off.
For sure.
I agree with you, because I think that if you're a CNN anchor and he's constantly going after fake news, Clinton News Network and all that, what are you going to do? You got to defend your company. In a way, it maybe pushes a network like CNN a little bit more into the opposition camp, probably helps their ratings with people who don't like this president, and it just kind of widens the divide.
Yeah, well, and that,
by design.
The truth of that is on display every day. To the extent it's possible to foresee where this is going, like a year from now, are we going to have 19th century style partisan press where, an outlet like the Washington Post came pretty close the other day, your old employer, by saying, we're here to preserve democracy from the tyrant, in effect.
At the same time, when the president kind of ratcheted up by attacking anonymous sources, saying he thinks the sources are made up,
right,
that they shouldn't be used, he was really talking about a Washington Post story which had 9 sources, except it was a weak example for the president, because that story was accurate. It was about Mike Flynn talking to the Russians, lying to Mike Pence, and it turned out to be true, and the president fired his national security advisor. But where is this going? I had thought, look, Trump can be very charming in private. I thought he would mend fences. He did go to the New York Times soon after the election. It seems to me now that we are now moving toward a kind of a polarized situation, Tucker, where a lot of the media, while saying that they're just upholding standards, are really going after this president with a special zeal. And by the way, all presidents should be covered aggressively. Right. And at the same time, the president and Steve Bannon, I think, have made clear that they have no interest in a truce, that they're going to keep prosecuting this war. It's the president's word, war. I don't know that it actually helps him pass his agenda, but it sure fires up his base. At the same time, it doesn't necessarily take him beyond his base. And remember, we are so unpopular, we are widely distrusted, so we're a big fat target for those who voted for Trump, but they've still got to kind of expand to people who maybe didn't vote for him but are open to the idea of a successful presidency.
The social pressure must be enormous in newsrooms. So if you work at one of those outlets denounced by the president and you have a story that in any way helps justify his agenda, you're going to be embarrassed to file that, aren't you?
I hope that's not the case, but keep in mind, journalists respond to incentives. So if the negative stories, land on the front page, lead the newscast, you might be inclined to do more of that. But here's the thing that people never got during the campaign, and I'm not sure they get now. Negative press helps Donald Trump. That doesn't mean we shouldn't investigate and challenge what he says, particularly if he strays from the facts. But when the press piles on this president, he gets the us versus them that he wants. He's able to say, see, I'm bringing change to Washington. I'm draining the swamp. They don't want that. Steve Bannon says globalist, corporatist. It gives him the distinction that he wants. So it's serving his purpose. Maybe both sides get something out of it. But I do feel as a journalist that it's unfortunate that it's reached this stage.
Well, it is. And by the way, as a journalist, if you're emotionally invested in a story, you cannot see it clearly. And so people who feel, hatred toward Trump should not be covering him. Or love, by the way, for that.
Yeah, and you see too much snark on Twitter from journalists who are not all that objective about the president.
You think? Howie Kurtz, thanks for joining us.
Great to see you.
Up next, superficially, this age ought to be one of plenty, and yet more and more people have their lives defined by insecurity in this country. We'll talk to a demographer who is sounding the alarm about what might be a miserable 21st century. It's depressing, but it's super interesting, so watch that. Also, Hartford, Connecticut on the brink of financial ruin, literally, yet its mayor's risking some federal funds by maintaining a sanctuary city status. Why is he doing that? He'll join us to explain. Well, things seem like they ought to be great in this country. Officially, the unemployment rate is low, crime is low, technology makes life easier than ever before. And yet, for many, and you may have noticed this, there is a sense of decline and even desperation. It's omnipresent in some places. Nicholas Eberstadt is a political economist at the American Enterprise Institute. In an amazing new piece called Our Miserable 21st Century, Eberstadt highlights the hellscape that is some of America, a land of opioid addiction, joblessness, and despair, existential despair. The article draws heavily from his recent book, Men Without Work, America's Invisible Crisis, and he joins us here on the set. It's a great piece. It's got the most depressing title I've ever read. It's the most depressing piece I've read this year, and yet it's so true, and it explains why we're where we are politically. So just summarize it. How did this happen?
Well, we entered the 21st century with the makings of a classic populist reaction. We've got a stock market that's going upwards and upwards and upwards, more wealth than ever before, a pretty crummy economy, and the bottom has dropped out on the labor market.
Yes.
So we've got more wealth for wealth holders, bad economy, and less work for workers than in any time in memory.
What's so frustrating living in Washington, where I know you live also, is being bombarded with fake statistics from the federal government. And prime among them, as you point out, is the unemployment rate. You say this. The unemployment rate increasingly looks like an antique index devised for some earlier and increasingly distant war, the economic equivalent of a musket inventory or a cavalry count. Why is it a false statistic?
Well, it's misleading. I mean, the actual little pieces in it are fine, but they're telling you the wrong thing. I mean, back in the days when we had a kind of a Dickensian world, when guys could either have a job or had to be looking for one, unemployment wasn't a bad way of looking at things. There's a third way now, which is neither working nor looking for work. And that's been the fastest growing demographic group of working age men for 50 years. There are now 3 times as many guys in the prime working age, 25 to 54, who are neither working nor looking for work as unemployed. So if you're looking at unemployment rates, you're looking at the wrong story.
It's amazing how many politicians fall into the deceit when they repeat that. Now, one measure you use, which I think seems like a pretty accurate one, are health outcomes. You want to measure the health of a society, look at the physical health.
Sure.
And you say in some ways ours is declining.
Well, if you look at what's happened, especially for Anglos, for non-Hispanic whites, for less educated non-Hispanic whites, we've got a death rate that's been going up since about the year 2000. And a lot of those increases have been due to overdoses, poisonings,
yes,
suicide, cirrhosis. I mean, I've done a lot of work on communist countries and on post-communist countries. This is a little bit too close to Russia for comfort.
Now, you say, and I could go on for an hour about this piece, which I hope our readers will find, Our Miserable 21st Century is its name. But you say that people in our world are constantly talking about income inequality. And you have this line, forever virtue signaling about how personally opposed to it they are, of course. But you say it's an abstraction. The reality of economic insecurity is what matters. What does that mean?
I think that for most people in America, the great American escalator's broken down. We had a great escalator that was lifting each generation to new heights of prosperity, and people over the course of their lives. Since about the year 2000, that hasn't been working. And that's why people feel insecurity. That's why people feel anxiety.
Yes.
People don't feel jealous of Bill Gates because he made all of this money and this fantastic set of innovations for us. People want their own lives and their kids' lives to be better.
Yes.
And that's where the anxiety and the insecurity is.
If there's one problem, and we're almost out of time, but if there's one problem you could solve to restart that American escalator, what would it be?
If you tried to do it from Washington, and Washington can only do so much, it would have to do with getting small businesses a little bit more free. We've been in a net business death environment since about the year 2007. They've been drowning under regulations. They've been drowning under burdens. It's not the big corporations. It's the mom and pop smaller businesses that generate the jobs for people. Free them up and let them do what they want to do.
So it goes back to the beginning, to work. It's about work. Men Without Work is the name of your book, not surprisingly. Nicholas Epperstadt, thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks so much.
Up next, President Trump's position on transgender bathrooms is the same one that President Obama took for most of his presidency, but the left is furious about it. We'll talk to the director of one group who's not signed an executive order intended to streamline federal regulations. For more on that, Fox White House correspondent Kevin Corke joins us tonight from the lawn outside. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Tucker, always nice to be with you, my friend. You're right. This latest executive order actually creates regulatory reform task forces within U.S. federal agencies. It's the latest and I dare say decisive effort to try to pare back U.S. red tape. Now, as you pointed out, this has all been part and parcel to what the president has been talking about for quite some time, quite frankly, and that is how do we unclog the engine of U.S. business? And so what he's trying to do is take aim at those regulations deemed most burdensome to the U.S. economy. As you also said, part of a very busy day for the president, who spent a little time at CPAC talking to a raucous crowd. He told them the fake news media are trying to discourage the American people, called them cunning and dishonest. He referred to one media outlet as the Clinton News Network. I'll leave that up to you to figure out who that is. Man, speaking of the media, there was a great deal of consternation here in Washington over the White House's decision to conduct an off-camera background briefing known as a gaggle for some, but not all, of the news media. Notably left off the list of invitees, the Times and CNN, although the media did get the access to the pool recording after the gaggle was over. Now, this all happened on a day when the White House was pushing back very strongly on suggestions that the administration tried to lean on the FBI to tamp down a story in the Times about the Trump campaign and Russia, a piece that FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe called, quote, BS. Now, reportedly, Chief of Staff Reince Priebus asked if there was any way the FBI could, help correct the record publicly and acknowledge that the story was false. But James Comey didn't want the Bureau to get bogged down in calling balls and strikes on every controversial media story, so they simply declined to get involved. Now, White House officials, my friend, insist tonight they had no conversation with the administration, with the FBI, that is, about the ongoing investigation into possible influence peddling by the Russians during the campaign. That is their story. They're saying that their complaint with the FBI was really about the Times story specifically. Back to you.
Kevin Corke. Thanks a lot, Kevin.
You bet.
Well, just 2 days ago, the Trump administration retracted an Obama-era guideline that claimed the 45-year-old Title IX law required all public schools to let transgender students use the bathroom and the locker room of their choice. The White House says bathroom issues are properly a concern for state and local governments, a position that is getting the administration absolutely savaged on the left. Jillian Weiss is executive director of the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. After the guidelines retraction, Weiss denounced the administration's states' rights position as nonsense. Jillian Weiss joins us now. Jillian, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So I believe, for whatever it's worth, in politeness and decency and not making people uncomfortable, especially children. I have 4. But I also believe in honesty, and so I just want to get to what exactly this means. So I'm a 47-year-old man. I think that's pretty obvious. If I were to decide tomorrow that I was a 47-year-old woman, should I be allowed to go shower in a women's locker room?
The idea that there's no objective factors to be considered in who is transgender and how we determine bathroom use is really not the way that this works. The fact is that people make this decision after a lot of serious consideration. They see medical doctors, there's psychologists involved, there's a lot to think about. It's not an easy process. As someone who's gone through that, I can tell you, you just don't decide tomorrow. So that's really not the way it works.
But what if I did decide tomorrow? Should I be, and it was totally sincere? Or, by the way, how would you know whether it was sincere or not, or anyone know? Only I can make that decision. And what if I did? Would I be allowed to go and shower in a women's locker room? And if not, why not?
Well, I think the answer is no. And, for example, we have the Gavin Grimm case, which, as you know, is coming up to the Supreme Court very soon. The ACLU just put out its brief in that case. And, they went through what he had to address. He changed his name. He had medical doctors. He had letters from psychologists and so on. It wasn't the kind of thing where he just came in and said, now I'm going to be using the boys' room. So
but let's go through because there's a lot at stake here, and you know this because you do it for a living. There's a lot of money at stake, and there's a lot bigger issues at stake. The definition of gender itself, which is at the center of any society. So what are the absolute standards that are required for a person to change his or her sex?
There is an organization called the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, which has a series of standards of care. We're on number 7 now, or 8 is coming up. And so this is something that doctors and medical people, psychologists have worked with for years, and there is a whole protocol. I can't give you the entire thing right now, but I think it's important to understand that there is something called transgender, and we have been here forever. We've been going to the bathroom forever.
Oh, but I'm not contesting any of that. And just to be totally clear, I'm not attacking anyone.
Yes.
But I think it's fair, because so much is at stake, to get much more precise than you are getting. So what exactly are the standards? And are they legal standards, or are they standards that you agree with? I mean, what exactly are the actual standards? Because, again, a lot of money is at stake here.
Yes. Well, the medical standards require seeing a therapist for a certain period of time before cross-sex hormones will be prescribed, a certain amount of time living as the opposite sex before certain kinds of medical treatment and surgery will be permitted. The other thing to keep in mind is that the courts have been parsing this for the last 15, 20 years. And so if somebody is being stereotyped because of their sex, sex because they're not perceived to fit in with appropriate masculinity or femininity because of whatever people perceive as their birth sex, that is something that's prohibited by the anti-discrimination statute.
Right, so that's the anti-discrimination statute, but you still haven't explained, I've asked you a bunch, what the legal standards are, because I don't think that there are any, and here's why that's a concern. So the federal government spends over $11 billion every year on sex-specific programs, and I'm sure you know what they are. The Small Business Administration, among many others, gives a ton of money to people because they are women. And so how are we supposed to navigate that if and let's be honest with each other, there are no standards actually, other than I say that I'm of a different sex. How are we supposed to navigate this, and what's going to prevent charlatans from jumping in and taking all that cash?
Well, let me give you an example. In the field of athletics, there are standards that have been developed for when someone is permitted to move into a particular single-sex activity. It involves how long they've been on hormones, how long their transition has been, whether or not they have the strength equivalent to, like in women's sports, for example. So there are standards that have been developed. Now, I don't know all of the details of that exactly, but you're asking, for example, how do we...
There is no absolute standard that's been developed, as you know. I mean, look, this is your job. You know that that's not true. There isn't. The WNBA doesn't have the same standard as the Olympics, as Notre Dame women's field hockey. I mean, there is no absolute standard.
Well, if that's what you're saying, is there an absolute standard? You're correct.
Yeah.
There is not an absolute standard. We are working this out as a society. It doesn't mean put transgender people back in the closet or tell transgender youth just, fend for yourself.
But nobody's suggesting that, at least on this show. What I'm suggesting is an adult look at this issue, and yet whenever you bring it up, like, what does this really mean? And can you actually change your sex biologically? You're denounced as, it's like a hater. And I'm just speaking for myself when I say that has nothing to do with it. I think it's fair to ask these questions. And so when are we going to find out exactly what it means to be a woman or a man?
Let me just suggest this. I have a list here of 25 studies that have been done over the last 15 years by scientists, peer-reviewed journals, discussing exactly what it means to be transgender, when someone is transitioning, the difference in the basal ganglia of the stria terminalis, the neuron density in the brain, and so on. I'm sorry for being very technical. The point is there are biological differences.
You're big. I mean, let me ask you this. Can you ascertain a person's sex with a blood test throughout life, from birth until death, and will that result remain consistent?
No, not with a blood test.
Not with a blood test. Okay, I don't know if that's correct, actually. But the point is, look, do you agree that, and we'll just leave it here, but do you agree that until there is a commonly recognized, legally recognized standard for sex, what constitutes a man and a woman, that we ought to slow down a little bit, stop building up all these anti-discrimination statutes before we can agree on who is being discriminated against, who meets the standard?
We've had these laws in the books for the past, 40 years. They have come to understand that this includes transgender people. For the last 15 years, we're all over society. We are going to the bathroom. We are showering. We are in athletics. So you can't put us back.
But no one's suggesting that, and you're dodging the question because you don't have an answer. And I just hope that you'll take this seriously, because I think it's a serious issue, and I hope that you will too. It's not just a matter of saying we're here, we're not going away. It's a series of doing.
But you're saying until we have a standard, until we have an absolute standard, we can't do anything, and I disagree with that.
I'm saying don't give $11 billion away to people who are faking. Like, what are we even talking about?
Who's faking?
I still don't know.
Where's your evidence of faking? Tell me who faked it, and then we can discuss it.
Jillian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, the city of Hartford, Connecticut is lurching toward bankruptcy, but its mayor is braving a loss of federal funds to preserve sanctuary city status. He'll tell us why next.
With Humera, your mission is possible.
Well, the city of Hartford, Connecticut has seen better days. More than a century ago, it was the richest city in America. Today, it's on the brink of bankruptcy. Its bonds are junk. It's forecasted to lay off hundreds of teachers, and it owes $400 million in unfunded pension liabilities. It seems like the kind of place to be eager to save some cash, but instead, the city is risking a loss of federal funds by maintaining its status as a sanctuary city. The president said he's going to crack down on cities like that. Today, he touted his tougher immigration policies, for example. Watch.
We've taken swift and strong action to secure the southern border of the United States and to begin the construction of a great border wall. Stopping the flow of illegal immigration. We will save countless tax dollars, and that's so important because the dollars that we're losing are beyond anything that you can imagine. And the tax dollars that can be used to rebuild struggling American communities, including our inner cities.
Luke Bronin is the mayor of Hartford, and he joins us now. Mr. Mayor, thanks for coming on.
Good evening, Tucker. Good to be with you.
Good evening. So you've made the. I used to live in Hartford, and so I've been following you. And I must say, you seem more impressive than a lot of mayors the city has had. And I wish you well, because I think it's a good city and it needs help. And I've been following your arguments on this, on sanctuary cities. And one of your arguments is familiar to me. It's that it will make the city safer not to bother people about their immigration status. And that's up for debate, of course. But the obvious question is, how many illegal immigrants in Hartford commit crimes? Or how many crimes in the last year or two have been committed by illegal immigrants in Hartford?
Well, you know, I talked to our police chief and I asked him, you know, how much of the crime that occurs in this city is committed by undocumented individuals. And the answer I get back is virtually none. Look, we are a city that is tackling our financial crisis head on. As you say, you were here a while ago. The city's been financially strapped for decades. Yeah. But for the first time in a long time, you got an administration that is tackling those financial issues head on, and we are fixing the structural stuff that needs to be fixed. While we're doing that, we've got to make sure that we're spending those dollars wisely. And that means prioritizing our law enforcement efforts on those people who actually pose a risk. You know, people who, violent criminals, gang members, suspected terrorists. And we're going to continue to do that. But the way to spend those dollars wisely is not to allow our local law enforcement to be conscripted into serving as a dragnet to help round up undocumented individuals who pose no threat to anybody.
But how do you know they pose no threat? I mean, when you say virtually no crimes in Hartford are committed by illegal immigrants, what's the number?
What I'm telling you is that our police chief, who, you know, I think a mayor should respect the judgment of a police chief on matters of public safety. Our police chief says that if we ask our police to start serving as the tip of the spear for federal enforcement agencies, not when we're talking about individuals who pose a threat,
you're missing my question.
In general, to help them round up undocumented individuals generally, they're concerned that that's going to hamper their ability to build relationships that allow them to get information
they don't get to make the policy
and keep the city safe.
They work for you. Right. You make the policies. So they carry out your orders on that. And so when you devise your policy, I think you would want to know what the number is. Are you telling me you didn't get the exact number from your chief of police? Clearly they commit some. A lot of people commit crimes. How many were committed by illegal aliens last year in Hartford? And you're saying you don't know.
What I'm telling you is that just like the International Association of Police Chiefs, which came out with a strongly worded letter and said that mandating local law enforcement to serve as a dragnet to try to focus enforcement efforts on people who pose no threat is not the way to keep cities safe.
What do you mean pose no threat?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt your filibustering here, Mr. Mayor.
You don't know the number. So when you say they pose no threat, you can't back it up. Now, let me say...
No, you're misunderstanding me, Tucker. What I'm saying is... I'm saying is we're going to target those individuals who we know have committed crimes. We are going to target... If we can't find somebody who's an undocumented individual, and that person is a violent criminal, we want that person deported. Just like if we've got someone who's involved in gang activity, or if we've got somebody who is a suspected terrorist, we want to partner with the feds to get those people out of here.
But what you're saying, and I asked you at the outset, is what is the scope of the problem? Now, we know that there are a lot of crimes committed in America by people here illegally. And by the way, it just so happens that the top news story on FoxNews.com right now is this from Bridgeport, a city not far away. Oscar Hernandez accused of killing his girlfriend and taking off with their daughter. He was caught by ICE officers, federal officers in your city, Hartford, 2013, deported. He came back. So this is a real thing.
Tucker,
so for you to say virtually no crimes are committed by illegal aliens without knowing the actual number seems a little irresponsible.
You're proving my point exactly. You're proving my point exactly, which is that's exactly the kind of person that we ought to be prioritizing. State, local, and federal partners working together to prioritize people who have records of violent crime. That individual had a long record of violent crime. That individual was deported under the Obama administration. That's exactly the kind of person we want to work together to get rid of them.
The feds grabbed him,
under Connecticut law,
they did so with the help of local authorities. That's the whole point. And you're saying my cops should not be helping the feds do this.
No. You are not. You're either not listening or you're intentionally misleading. But what I'm saying is that's exactly where our cops are going to work hand in hand with the feds to get that person out of here.
but you don't even know the scope of the look, you know exactly what's going on as well as I. You don't want to offend a political constituency, and so you're saying we are taking a stand. You're telling me, time out, you're telling me that a political constituency is undocumented individuals or a political constituency that I'm... Look, you know exactly what I'm saying. It's politically unpopular for you to say you're in any way cooperating with the Trump administration on this divisive issue. And I'm saying, as I have from the beginning, that you don't know the scope of the problem because you didn't ask your police chief how many crimes in Hartford were committed by people here illegally. How can you make policy without knowing that number? Here's what I've asked my police chief, and this is what I'm going to respect his judgment on. What I've asked my police chief is, do you want your police officers to become responsible for asking victims of crime or witnesses of crime about their immigration status so they're afraid to share information? Do you want to be detaining people who haven't committed any crime simply on the basis of their immigration status? And he says definitively no, because he believes it's going to make it harder for his police officers to do their job. Shouldn't you get the numbers before you devise policy? I mean, you're a smart guy. Shouldn't you get the numbers rather than saying... I think what I should do as mayor, and I think what you should do as whatever you are, is consult those people who are actually in law enforcement. And the International Association of Police Chiefs has a very clear view on this, as does our command staff and police chief here in Hartford. You know what, Mr. Mayor, I'll stick with numbers because I take my job seriously. Okay. Thanks for joining us. So do you have the numbers? You won't give them up. That's why I don't have them. I wish I did. You didn't even ask your police chief. When you get those numbers, send them to me. And if they really are negligible, I'll be willing to apologize. Thanks. Up next, plenty of Hollywood stars have bemoaned President Trump's immigration policies. Actor Robert Davi has a simple question. If you love the refugees so much, why don't you let them into your parties? How about the Oscars? He joins us next.
Safe drivers who switch to eSurance.
Well, in a recent article, actor Robert Davi wrote that if Hollywood hates enforcing immigration laws so much, they ought to stop controlling access to their parties. And if they won't, they're racist. Davi played Bond villain Franz Sanchez, was also Special Agent Johnson in Die Hard. He died horribly in both those roles, but the man himself is still alive, and he joins us now. Robert, it's great to see you.
Great to see you.
This piece, I just loved it. I'm going to read the nut of it here. I propose Meryl Streep, Chelsea Handler, Richard Gere, Robert De Niro, and others lead an Oscar first. Do away with the rules, barriers, and tickets to the parties. I ask all migrants, all legal and illegal criminals, and unvetted refugees to converge on Hollywood to come to the Oscars and the after parties. And not just to serve the wine and the appetizers, but to attend.
To attend. I want them. There's 3,500 seats at the Oscars, and there's other parties all around town, the Vanity Fair party. Let them come as guests. Give 3,000 tickets to the illegal immigrants, the criminals, the refugees. Let them enjoy the Wolfgang Puck dinners and the governor's ball and the entertainment. I think it's about time that Hollywood, which they do great things, and I respect all those talents, by the way. I disagree vehemently the message they're giving America. So I want to have all of the migrants, I ask all of you, if you're listening to me, converge on Hollywood Boulevard on the night of the Oscars and be guests of all the people that believe we should have a country of no law and no order.
And no barriers.
And no barriers.
I mean, there might be, that's what my concern is. Outside the Vanity Fair party, there might be barriers keeping people out.
Well, that's the other caveat. I don't want any barriers. And I say that the men in blue, the police officers, Hollywood shouldn't hire them to protect them anymore.
Of course not.
They shouldn't have those protections. I mean, the hypocrisy of it all, you know. And then, after the party, bring tents and camp out in Bel Air. There's 9-acre homes. There's a lot of acres. I think they should camp out there and see what happens. I mean, we're all for, and this is with love in my heart. This is with love in my heart.
Well, that's how you sign the peace with great love. Do you think this will happen?
Do I think? No, I don't think it'll happen.
But how could it not? How could you get up at the Oscars and say these are marginalized people and the president or whomever is a racist for wanting to keep them out, and then keep them out of your Oscar party? I mean, can you imagine the thrill of being a Syrian refugee, for example, and going to the Vanity Fair party?
An unvetted Syrian refugee. I think we should even, just even invite some of them right there from wherever they might be in Budapest right now and bring them over and say, come on, Habibi, come to the Oscars. I mean, it's sad that they don't, especially since they're so, again, that's the hypocrisy of the whole thing.
Why do you think they don't? I mean, I've been, to a lot of parties in L.A., and there are a lot of people who may or may not have legal status who are serving you.
Oh, absolutely.
But very few, maybe none, actually,
are guests. But they treat them well. They tip them a few dollars here and there, and and they thank them. No, look, there's a lot of people. Let me, with the caveat of this, a lot of people in Hollywood have big hearts. A lot of talents have big hearts. But
I think a lot of them do.
They do, absolutely, and they do great things. But for some reason, they've lost sight of the American worker. They've lost sight of America, the blue collar of America, and what America stood for. For some reason, why is vetting And he's not saying ban all Muslims or ban all refugees or anything. This is on the books. He's not changing any laws. And even the 7 states that Obama, countries that Obama had put down, there was no buzz to that. Talk about the media for a second, you know? This media thing, and we hear all the brouhaha of the media. I have an idea for the administration and all of everyone. Who's the parent company of CNN?
I can't get into that, but there is indeed a parent company, yes.
There is a parent. May I say it?
Yeah, of course.
Time Warner.
Yeah.
So what if at the things, when they have things, they go, Time Warner, parent company of CNN, Jim Acosta.
Yep.
Go, Jim. How about if they did that? They did Universal, Comcast, NBC, MSNBC, Joe Scarborough. Go, Joe. Now all of a sudden, because if the president is held accountable, and he's the main guy, shouldn't those companies be held accountable? And maybe they'll think twice about how they're distorting news.
Great question. Robert Davi. You haven't made many friends today in your hometown, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, we share you some surprising rhetoric from a top Democrat many years ago. It's interesting.